My name is Ebony Love, and I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm joined by Ariana Cobb, who is a high school student in Jacksonville. And we're also joined by Allie Wagner and Shannon Young, who are here to observe this kind of oral history interview. We have the honor of interviewing Armani Madison, who is in Columbus, Ohio. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Just making sure. And today is Monday, October 10th, 2022, and this interview is taking place via Zoom. And so now that that's out of the way, Armani, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi to anyone who's listening. My name is Armani Madison. I am from Stockbridge, Georgia, and I am a lawyer. Graduated in 2021, living in Columbus, Ohio for the next year.
Okay, and so I always like to start with a little, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go on.
So I always like to start with like a kind of grounding question. What is the first memory that you can remember?
That's nice. My first memory that I can remember is probably, sitting in the basement, or I think basement, garage, let's say basement of my great aunt's house that my talking on a lime green phone that my mom handed to me, and we were living in that house when we just moved from Illinois, and that was the house that she let my mom or give my mom to stay in, and so we were. I guess I was maybe, like four, maybe 3 or 4, something like that. Probably 3. It's probably the earliest memory I have. Yeah, it was lime green phone. Corded phone.
Of course. Was it a rotary phone with the spinning wheel?
Nah, it wasn't. It wasn't that old school, but it was, the one, you dialed in, the base part you dial in, and yeah.
Okay, and so when you gave your introduction, you said that you're from Stockbridge, Georgia, but then you also just said that you moved from Illinois. So were you born in Illinois or were you born in Georgia?
Oh, yeah. So I was born in Carbondale, Illinois. My dad was a college student at Southern Illinois University. My mom was, I guess, on break between college experiences, we could say. We moved to Georgia when I was 2, but 2 or 3, and yeah, that's how we ended up in Georgia, pretty much. Yeah.
And what are your parents' names?
So my mother's name is Monique. My dad's name is Kevin.
Okay. And so you're not a first generation college student?
I am not.
And so what did your parents study and when did they finish?
So my dad studied marketing and he started college in 1990. He started at Central State. He's from Cleveland. So he started in Central State I guess right outside maybe Dayton, Ohio. I don't remember which city Central State actually is in. But he did a year there, and he transferred to Clark, Atlanta. He graduated in 97. And my mom started at Clark, Atlanta in 1990, and she left in 1991 after her mom passed away. And she picked college back up in her 30s, and she finished from DeVry in 2007 with her bachelor's. And so.
Okay. So family, y'all just racking up degrees all over the place, right?
Something like that, I guess. Yeah, we do our best.
Okay, and so this lime green phone, I have to come back to it.
Sure.
So you're in Stockbridge, and so did you kind of do your K through 12 schooling in Georgia, or did you move back and forth?
No, it was in Georgia.
And how was that?
Cool. I mean, I went to I went my whole K-12 experience. I went to schools that were majority black. So schools in, for anyone who is a Atlanta area native who will eventually be listening in. Clayton State. I'm sorry, Clayton County for elementary school. I was in Fulton County. I went to a different school every year, middle school. And my last year was in Hampton, Georgia, which is in Henry County. And that's the county that I went to school for high school as well. But always predominantly Black institutions. And, education was cool. I mean, it was very, in hindsight, I think it was great to be able to have a K-12 education surrounded by, peers and teachers who looked like me for the most part. Certainly some of the disadvantages being, maybe the educational offerings were not always incredible. But I think that the, and from my high school, the outcomes for most students were not, most students didn't graduate from a 4-year college. And so, that was interesting as well. But all in all, I have a pretty positive, review of my college experiences. And for the sake of transparency, Ebony, I'll actually go back because at some point, knowing the questions are going, deeper into my personal life than I anticipated, which is great. I love it because I'm a very open book. But my wires might get crossed if I don't mention this beforehand. So my, because I mentioned that my dad went to SIU, and then I said that my dad went to Central State, and then Clark, those two, So SIU is my biological father. We're estranged now. But my stepfather, who I call my dad, he went to Central State. And so for the I guess the remaining portion of this interview, when I say dad, I'll be referring to him. Just to clear that up, because that might be confusing.
Totally fine. And I don't know if you see, but if you see me looking down, I'm actually taking notes, and I'm old school, so I'm taking notes. So I apologize if you see me looking all over the place.
Oh, no problem.
So for those who don't know about me, I also went to school in Georgia, but I went to school in Paulding County, which is middle of nowhere. Nobody knows where that is. And so for me, going to school, it was we were really, it really is a rural community where I grew up. And so I know that Clayco, for those who are unaware, Clayco is just the shortened version of Clayton County. Clayco is a little bit different. And so what were your hobbies growing up? Were you outside a lot? Was it a rural area? Were you in any sports?
Yeah, so it was pretty, it's pretty, I guess, when we first moved to Georgia, it's pretty urban because we lived in Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is seated. Then moved to Clayton County, then moved to Henry County. Clayton County, again, Clayco, Riverdale, Jonesboro, that sort of thing. I maybe, Ebony, maybe you and I are on the older side of the listenership. Hopefully not. Anyone who remembers Trinidad James, All Gold Everything. That was 2013. He he filmed that in Clayco, Riverdale. So for those who are not familiar, go check it out. I think that probably gives the indication of Clayco. It was good. So growing up, I was actually a pretty introverted kid. Introverted, asthmatic kid. Definitely took a minute to grow into myself socially, we could say. And so my hobbies were, reading, playing Pokemon on Game Boy, which I actually think it's a pretty good game, I think, to actually develop, young kids cognition, because those games are hard and you learn a lot of big word concepts. So, anyone listening, if you have young kids, consider, Pokemon Blue and Red and Yellow. But so I enjoyed that. Really, drawing, writing. I mean, I was a quiet kid, so not super social. And then you said sports. I mean, I've always been pretty bad at sports, but my parents did really try to put me in sports. And so they put me in one season of baseball, and they took me out halfway through the first season because I used to pick flowers instead of catching the ball. The ball would roll next to me, and they'd be like, "Monty, go get it. He's running. He's first base, second base." I was like, "Well, that's okay." So I got so upset one day that I cursed. I like yelled out a curse word, so my parents pulled me out. They reprimanded me beforehand. Then they pulled me out, and then I played one season of soccer. And I scored one goal, which made me one of the highest scoring players because we were 7. But I said I didn't want to play again, so I have not played an organized sport on a team since I was 7, and so that pretty much wraps up my hobbies. Yeah, I like eating. I still like eating, so that's a good hobby too. Those are those are the big things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know really how to segue, so we're just going to take a hard left. Did you always know that you wanted to become an attorney?
No, I didn't realize I wanted to be an attorney until like the very end of college, actually.
Okay, so how did you transition from high school to undergrad, and where did you go?
Sure. So I went to Brown University, Rhode Island. Um, I guess growing up in college and growing up, I didn't get a whole lot of messaging about college from like my school. My parents were very adamant that I was going to college. Their messages was that like I was going to college. They were like, I guess it was likely to be in Georgia. That's kind of what we were exposed to. And I thought about going to Morehouse, something like that, but my parents said I might get distracted if I go, which is valid. But I ended up actually, yeah. So I was planning, to go to school in Georgia. I took the practice SATs, and I got I guess a high score, and so I got into this program, National Achievement. Started getting feedback about all these national colleges. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to school outside of Georgia. So I was thinking like University of Alabama or something like that. And went into my counselor's office and, as I put something. And as I was leaving, I happened to see, and her door was like plastered with papers, like full of stuff. And happened to catch my eye. Maybe they use really good color formatting, but this program called QuestBridge, which some folks listening might be familiar with. And QuestBridge is a program that, basically funds low-income students to apply to the colleges, to apply to the nation's, at the time, top 32 colleges. I'm sure there are more colleges now, free of charge, which is, even applying is a big deal for a low-income student like myself, right? If there's a school that you don't think you're gonna get into, you're not gonna spend the few dollars you have applying to a long shot college. And so I applied to every school they had, including Wellesley, which all women's school. My name is very gender neutral. So it took a minute to get feedback that, in fact, I can't go to Wellesley. But, I had low information at that time. But got into Brown, one of those schools. My classmate and I were the first from my school to go to an Ivy League institution. And so she had gotten in a couple months before me and kind of helped me with that process, even telling me to be on time for my interview. And I was late, so she stalled the interviewer, which is good. They flew me up there, to pay for me to go up there. And I was just shocked by how liberal of an institution it was. I mean, Georgia, it's a pretty conservative state. And, even the political ads used to say, such and such is a socialist, with the ominous music playing. And I was like, oh, socialism, I don't know what that is, but that sounds pretty bad. Coming up there and seeing, students like, happy liberal politics, I thought that was amazing and something that I wanted to try living somewhere different. Rhode Island is very different. And yeah, it was lit, in short. So that was my journey. Yeah, and Brown gave me a good amount of money because they said, "Wow, you broke," and I said, "Yes, I am." And then they gave me the money. Here we are. We bought. So yeah.
And here we are, being that you graduated from Harvard Law School. So you mentioned earlier that you found out that you wanted to go to law school. Sorry.
Yeah, you asked me if I always wanted to be a lawyer. Was I supposed to address how I decided to become a lawyer, or were you going?
That was my next question. See, you read the room. There you go. So how did you know that you wanted to become a lawyer during your time at Brown?
Yeah, so I started wanting to be a professor coming into undergrad. And then I realized after a couple of years that I hate research, which is also probably problematic for becoming a lawyer too. But I really just like academic research. And because I applied for this program called the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship. And if you get that program, it funds your summers. It funds you getting a PhD, but you are prepared for during your summers of college. And I was like, if I get into this program, I'm gonna be a PhD. If I don't, then I won't. And I didn't get it, so I'm not a professor today. But I realized I really just wanted people to call me Professor Madison. I didn't really have no real reason to be one. But I was very involved, very, very involved in activism at Brown. I founded the NAACP there. I did a lot of on and off campus, activism, some sit-ins, all this organizing work. And as I got close to the graduation, I had a couple things go through my mind. First, I saw my peers going into all these, prescribed, career fields, consulting and, consulting or Wall Street or, I don't know, some, policy think tank or something like that. These fields that I felt like they were going into, and they would be restricted from being able to advocate for the views that they so forcefully pushed as students. And so I was afraid of that. And I was like, how can I continue to be as bombastic as I am or was at the time and still be able to live financially? But more important than that, how can I understand the things that I've been advocating for the past 4 years, truly understand it? Because, so much of things that, we, protest against or advocate for are these are legally based. These are laws that we want passed, laws that we want rescinded, policies that we want enacted, policies that we want rescinded. And, being an activist without any additional training or credentials, you are very dependent on others. So you are dependent on politicians to put forth, your policy preferences and ideas. You're dependent on lawyers to take that stuff into court, whether it's, impact litigation or even folks get detained, during a protest. You're very dependent on them. Whether it's, social workers, whether it's just, I felt very dependent and I wasn't truly able to understand what I was advocating for. So I was like, being a lawyer. And, I moved to Baltimore after undergrad to work in education. And one thing that really stuck with me is when I was in Baltimore, I think those were the years they started this. Every year, there is a community initiative called the Baltimore Ceasefire. The idea is that people won't kill each other for 72 hours. The idea is that, they recognize that a lot of community violence arises from lack of resources. And so they were like, how do we come together as a community to provide the resources to help folks to be able to, to address, some of those inequalities and inequities. So one thing, that I volunteered with was an expungement clinic. And it really stuck with me that these were people in a community who happened to have law degrees and be barred, but could take an afternoon, have nothing but their computer and help folks, produce life-changing outcomes for people. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. So all those things kind of put together, I began to take, the idea of being a lawyer seriously. And so, it's probably like my last year of college, or the first year of me being out of college, that made me, seriously think about being a lawyer. And so I came to law school wanting to do civil rights litigation.
Are you a first generation lawyer?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned a lot in that response. And so some of the things that I picked up on were your undergraduate activism, but specifically that combined with working with the folks in Baltimore. And so when you were doing all of this, founding the NAACP at Brown and working with the folks in Baltimore, did you ever have a mentor who kind of walked you through the process or had conversations with you to encourage you to actually sit down, take the LSAT, and go to law school?
No. I mean, I had, I guess mentors in the sense of like, I did have mentors or like folks who, looked out for me, or it's like, like come to them with like, this is what's going on, or to advise me loosely. But like someone who was in the industry, no. And that wasn't necessarily for lack of trying. And that is, so, maybe we'll get into this later, but that's one reason why I'm so passionate about like, any student who reaches out to me, like talk to them about law school, even proactively, because I felt like, I was put in touch with lawyers. I came across lawyers, and lawyers who looked like me, by the way. And the ones that I met, a lot of them, I felt like didn't necessarily have the time or the priority to really assist me deeply. And so a lawyer as a mentor, no. But folks in my life who were older, who were experienced, yes, I did have.
And so, by the way, quick pause. Ariana, did you have any questions?
So what you just said about how you felt like all of the African American attorneys that you met and how that you felt like they didn't have any time, do you feel like that motivated you more to become an attorney, or did you feel like it deteriorated you in some way?
So that's a good question. And I guess I had felt, I guess it was discouraging in a slight bit of way, but I think it was more motivational. And I think too, and I mean, I guess everyone has a different perspective. I kind of felt that even growing up as, more of a low income student, when I came across folks who were, the folks I was exposed to who were maybe more settled in their career, maybe more upper class, whatever, I kind of felt like that sense of like not taking me seriously or being able to give me the time. And, that was demotivational at first. But I think ultimately that did become motivational. And actually, Ebony, I will say, actually, now I think about it, I mean, when I think mentor, I think of like someone who's like older. I guess I will say I did have like a good model for like going into law school. And I did have someone who helped me sort of figure out the LSAT. I forgot this. So my college girlfriend, she ended up going to law school a year before me. And she did help me with like figuring out like, kind of, how to take the LSAT in a way that's like, effective. Her older sister graduated from Harvard Law School in 2016. So soon before I got there. And between the two of them, they were helpful in like helping me with critical things, with trying to figuring out like how to present myself, but also how to study, at least loosely, very loosely, like how to study in a way that I will say, I think a lot of times that, I think I'm pretty sharp, but I don't necessarily know if I got into Harvard Law School without a lot of that very critical advice. So I do want to mention that somehow skipped my mind, but yes.
If you could go back in time, would you have wanted to go to an HBCU?
I actually think about that a lot because my sister is at Spelman right now. She's a sophomore. Um, and I, I'm actually, I'm not sure. I don't necessarily think. I don't think. What's the problem? Was it? Do I wish I had gone to HBCU, or like would I have gone to HBCU?
Like if you go back in time, and you can answer either one of those questions. And
Would I have?
this is not about me at all, but I know that I think that my formative time in undergrad probably would have been different if I would have went to an HBCU. So I don't know if you feel the same.
I do think it would have been significantly different. Yeah. I mean, I went to Brown. It was a great education. It was a great springboard, and going to a school like Brown. I mean, in all transparency, I mean, I was not a classroom guy, and I was not like a study guy. But I do feel like I was able to still access a lot of great opportunities, even though I wasn't even even close to the top of my class. And I think going to HBCU would have really fortified me in other ways. I think that like a school like Brown, just like the resources that it has, just kind of like unparalleled. And I think I do think it put me in a position that I am now. So I don't regret my decision, but I don't feel a strong affinity for my undergraduate institution. Like it was okay. I didn't particularly enjoy it. Um, I don't have any apparel from my undergrad. I'm not, you probably will not be catching me at the reunions, so to speak. But it was fine. I thought it was great resources, and I do think that HBCUs do amazing work, even beyond like the academics that are just you can't replicate it. I mean, I think part of the reason that I'm not overjoyed to go back to Brown's campus, for example, I've had a very difficult transition coming from all Black schools for 12 years, and schools, students who look like me, and a lot of them who are in the same social economic, status as me. And my freshman, roommate was this rich white kid, who was obnoxious. And, I had to kind of learn to be on the campus with a bunch of white students who I hadn't really learned. I hadn't been socialized around white people. I mean, I had it, and, even being around, even conceptualizing, which is crazy to me even now. But at that age, 18, 19, I could not conceptualize of like even other Black students who grew up like in upper class environments. I just didn't. I don't know why I couldn't associate the two, but I just like it was just alien to me. And so I think I had a very difficult transition, and my social time there was more difficult because I had difficulty adjusting. I had class resentment, significant class resentment. And I think HBCUs just teach you, a lot of self-confidence, you're around, great folks who look like you. You know, the bonds that you build with your fellow students, with your professors just last for a lifetime. And so, I really don't know Ebony, honestly. It's kind of difficult. And I follow my sister's journey so closely because it's so interesting because we made those two very different decisions. And so I wonder. I always wonder, what it's like. And you and I, Ebony, have talked about that, like wondering what that would have been like. So I don't know. Honestly, I really don't.
Yeah, and so I asked that specifically because we have someone on the call who should go to Spelman, but that is a conversation we could segue into a little bit later. But so I just want to now touch on kind of your law experience and like becoming an attorney. And so one of the things that really stood out to me when now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was going through her confirmation hearings is Senator Alex Padilla was asking her a question about, what she would tell future generations who, I don't know if he specifically put it in the context of law school or if he was just talking about her accomplishments generally, but she told us a story about her walking through Harvard one day and she was really overwhelmed, and a fellow Black student saw her walking in the courtyard or whatever. And that fellow Black law student, or I don't know if it was a law student, but that fellow Black student looked at her, saw her head down, and said, persevere. And so when she was telling us that story, she was saying that she would tell future Black students, whether they're going to Harvard, whether they're becoming attorneys, that she would tell them to persevere. And so I guess what my question is did you have a similar story where you had to overcome something at Harvard Law School, or if you had like a mentor who kind of had to have that same kind of gentle touch to say, you know what, it sucks here, but you know what, you can make it?
So at Harvard Law School in particular, yeah. I would say, I mean, not a professor so much, but a older student, a student a year above me. His name was Jason, and he was probably the most influential student, Black student, but other student during my time there. And I mean, his advice to me was sort of similar. I felt pretty self-conscious about my writing abilities and ability to be a lawyer and all these other sort of things. And I mean, I ain't gonna lie, my grades reflected that too, high key. But he kind of like he told me like, at the end of the day, like we all, going to be lawyers. And which I can kind of elaborate on a little bit later, he was just kind of, I guess, like reminded me of the proper context of what it was I was learning. And the context he gave me was that the law is this thing that people tend to think of as this immutable. I mean, just like this, I don't know, like I don't know. There was Adam and Eve and there was the law. And the law was just this unquestionable code that just, it's just there. It just came out of nowhere. And really helped me to realize that the law is a product of, human ideas, the ideas of humans who are very biased and flawed. And all those biases and flaws are imported into the law. And that the idea is, yes, to learn the law, but to learn it in a way that understanding that this is something that, if you are someone who's justice oriented, you're always looking for ways to change it, take it apart, and not to be discouraged if I'm sitting in law school and I went there because I wanted to represent or help marginalized people, and I'm confused and agitated that I'm there learning about some case about foxes, capturing foxes from 1817 or whenever, and I'm trying to understand how I can help some brother, I've known, growing up, with, avoiding bankruptcy, staying out of jail, whatever. And one, he was like, some point this will all make sense. But if it doesn't, but, it's not supposed to make sense because it's oppressive, was his view. And it's my view. And it was just very, very encouraging to me. And I always kept that. And even as a law clerk, I keep that in mind too. And it is more helpful than it's incredibly helpful. Yeah.
And so for those who are listening who are not attorneys or law students, he's talking about Pearson versus Post when he says Fox. Everybody has to read it. It's anyway. Is it Pearson versus Post?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how traumatizing that case is, because you're just like, what are we talking about? Somebody killing a fox on anyway. Literally. Okay, so I don't know. Ariana, do you have any questions about his time in law school? Because if I start talking about law schools, we're going to be here all night.
So I remember you mentioning how like it was difficult you transitioning into a college where there was like not as many colored people around. And so I go to Stanton and I think I'm one of 13 in my program in the Ivy program.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's like I find that very difficult to be able to connect with my teachers and connect with my classmates. And so a lot of times I get this perception that because I'm so quiet and introverted that I get the angry, like I'm just so mean and unapproachable. So I wondered if you ever like had that going to school.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, that's hard in Ebony. I'm sure you can commiserate with that. And I mean, a lot of that is that the idea of a student who is outspoken in any way or brings up issues or what have you is angry. I mean, is an experience that is I mean, it is racially biased, but it also is. I mean, I guess there is the trope of the angry black man too, but I think there's a particular pronounced trope of the angry black woman, right? And so part of that, in all honesty, I can't completely speak to, right? But have I had that experience? I mean, to the extent of being the angry student, yes, yes, I have. I mean, I've had more, maybe more numbers than 1 and 13, but I guess in your first, I kind of say like one piece of advice that like it does get better, and that it may be hard to kind of appreciate that you are currently kind of situated, I guess, in a particular place, in a particular space where, once you leave it or graduated from it, you will a lot of times find your perspectives may be more validated. Um, as a student in college, I took pains to kind of surround myself with students of color wherever possible. It wasn't always possible, as you can imagine. And I think coming to school, I was a very angry student, but especially my second year, when I started, learning or thinking more about the injustices in broader society. And so I was protesting all the time, and and not understanding at the time why my classmates were not similarly incensed, and classmates who looked like me, even, who were, I can remember the first protest I did, and actually this a former police commissioner for the NYPD, his name is Ray Kelly, came to campus in the fall of 2013 to give what he thought was going to be a great speech on the value of policing. There were a group of students who had other thoughts about what he was going to be able to present. Um, and he did not present that speech ultimately. But, when we were protesting that, there were a lot of students there, a lot who looked like me, some who didn't, who looked at us with disgust and anger and like, why are you doing this? You're making it harder for the rest of us who are here. Why are you doing this? And I think, I mean, ultimately, I don't know, kind of had to just get a sense of like what my broader goals were, and to be okay with not necessarily being surrounded by people who even agreed with me. I mean, I think, sort of to Abby's earlier question about a mentor, again, I wouldn't say I had a lot of mentors in the sense of like older sage people who kind of told me, helped me figure out what to do. But a lot of other folks, who were in the community, who may have been my age, may have been slightly older, who held me down in an emotional sense, who held me down and validated me. And I think, that could be family, that could be friends. Like, I don't know, so much to me of like the journey is like, yes, like knowing the nuts and bolts of like what you're doing, so if you're becoming a lawyer, it's taking and passing the law school admissions test and getting your references, all these other technical things. But I am always very adamant when I talk to students that more than half of it is like the emotional, kind of, are you fortified do you have a support system? Who's going to support you and validate you when you feel, you go into class and, people are being, people are, saying, they're playing devil's advocate and they're saying things that are like, very offensive, so to speak, or, you know, you look, you interview for a position and the interviewer tells you that you may not be, you may not be qualified for the position, qualified to be a lawyer. These are the times where you really need people to be in your space. And I think if you have that support system, and it can look like anyone, because I have had people who have held me down, who have been friends, who have been, professors, sure, but folks who had never had a college degree, or folks, who, various library staff and janitors and like what have you. And I would say if you could find, friendly spaces, there are just so many ways that you can be mentored and held down. That's not just the way that we typically think of folks who are, established in the same field that we have. Because if you don't have people who hold you down and you don't have like that emotional support, even if you have everything else, you have the smarts and the knowledge and all this sort of stuff, if you are not grounded and supported, a lot of folks will find themselves kind of, succumbing to other, other issues, whether it's, depression, substance abuse, or, I've seen that. So, I guess and I have a tendency to give these long answers, but, kind of finding comfort and validation in those spaces and those people that, may even be unexpected folks. They've carried me through, and I think, they would carry someone through in that position as well. So.
You just mentioned a protest, and I'm assuming that took place at Brown.
It did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. As a fellow, I don't know how to, as a fellow person who liked to draw attention to things that needed to be drawn attention to,
Yeah.
did you participate in the same activities when you were in law school?
Actually, this is an interesting thing too. So when I was in law school, well, one, I think that law schools are structured in a way that makes it harder to have sustained student protest. In a sense that like, you have one less year, so you have less institutional memory between classes of folks who understand what was wrong with your institution. And there's a much tighter relationship between, your dean and your employers, and what you're doing in class and your employers and what's being covered, what coverage you may get and your employers. So like folks are much more timid. And I also think that law school is just an inherently moderating, if maybe conservatizing institution. But when I was there, which is between 2018 and 2021, we did have, the classes before us who were very very involved and well covered for their protests, ongoing protests. We kind of came during a period that was a bit more, I guess things had cooled off a bit, so to speak. So we didn't have really, to my memory, like much, so many incidents that sort of drew like sustained student protests for things that were kind of like internal. Like the biggest thing I can remember was a sustained student protest to get the institution, Harvard Law School and Harvard University as a broader entity, to divest from companies, institutions that were involved with privatized prisons and profiting from prisons. But I honestly, and that was part of, the issue for me, is that I just didn't feel as connected to what was going on, in the community when I was in law school, because we didn't have as much, going on in that sense. The biggest thing we kind of had was every year, the student activists would teach this session called Disorientation, where we present and put on to future generations of students the protest history of Harvard Law School, and bringing back folks who were instrumental in that, and having episodes where we've had outright opposition from the Dean of Students office or students who were threatened with suspension. So that was something to navigate for a lot of students. But no, I definitely didn't feel, as plugged in the same way. I think it's just, it's a bit harder in law school.
And so I guess the big question that's remaining for everyone, did you become a civil attorney after you graduated from law school?
No, I didn't. I became I became a law clerk, a federal law clerk, which you're gonna.
What is that? What is that? What do? You don't have to go into detail if you don't like. Just big picture. What do you do?
It's kind of like this, Ebony. When I was out of school between undergrad and law school, I took 2 years to work in education. I was making a little bit south of $40,000 a year living in Baltimore, and I learned how to get by with what I felt like was a very small amount of money. And I graduated law school. I was like, let me run that back. I had a lot of fun making ends meet with 40. Let me try that with marginally more. No. But in all seriousness, I decided to become a federal law clerk, which for folks who are unfamiliar, and contrary to the name, which probably causes confusion with a lot of our family members, because they like, Monty, you went to law school to become a clerk? You could have done that without an education. I know somebody who a clerk at Kroger right now, It's a position in which you are basically, you are assisting a federal judge and dispensing his or her duties. So the idea is this: federal judges have a lot of cases, a lot of active cases, somewhere in the hundreds, like 300 to 400 cases, active cases. And as you can imagine, there's only 24 hours in a day, and judges need folks to help them to digest what's happening. And so a law clerk prepares judges for hearings with lawyers, prepares them for trial and hearings from lawyers. Federal law clerks may draft the decisions that the judge makes after he or she hears a case or a hearing, because the judge really relies heavily on folks who are sharp to get what the lawyers are arguing, to summarize it for them, and to make a recommendation. And then if they're on the same page, to draft what that'll look like. And of course the judge is involved in all levels of this process, but the judge relies heavily on these folks. And it's a important job to ensure that cases move. If people are able to get, when they file their cases, are able to actually get a resolution at some point, and that the judge understands, what he or she needs to understand. So it's considered a gold star for our profession. I'm sure you would agree with that, Ebony. And it allows us to understand, for us to understand what's going on, so that when we become lawyers, we kind of know better what to do, what not to do, but also builds a relationship with the judge for a long period of time, which is helpful in our careers. But I became a federal law clerk. I was a law clerk for those probably who are in law school who are listening, I was a federal law clerk on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals last year, which is based in Atlanta. And now I am on a district law clerk on the Southern District of Ohio for this year. And so these are stepping stones to becoming a civil rights attorney, because it is helpful to know what's going on in the background, the back scenes, before you become an actual lawyer. I mean, we are actual lawyers, a practicing lawyer. But I hope to, in the coming years, to be able to actually go into civil rights litigation. So representing victims of police misconduct and wrongful convictions is what I'm most interested in.
And so for folks listening, lawyers like to joke a lot and like sometimes we're super sarcastic. So I like to tell people that I'm a fake attorney. I am actually a real attorney and I do have a bar card, but I don't practice. So I'm a fake attorney right now.
My bar card better than me.
My bar card is like a sheet of paper, like it's so flimsy, and I'm like, okay, I don't even know my bar number. It's like a whole thing. But anyway, I think I have run through all of the questions that I had, but I'm going to let Ariana, if you have any more questions. I do have one more question after that, but Ariana, I want to give you a couple of moments if you have any more questions.
So you mentioned how you want to work in civil distress, and so my initial like wanting to be an attorney was because just growing up where I grew up, I'm from Jacksonville, and seeing everything happening with the police, and then COVID happened and the Black Lives Matters protests, everything kind of molded me to wanting to go that route. But then you have other people telling you like the money's in corporate law or the money's in this law. So how do you balance like finding like your passion with like the ambition to be successful?
Man, that's a great question, Ariana. And that's a question I've been asking myself for a real long time. That still probably ask myself really. So my initial answer is that it is possible to do well and do good at the same time is the refrain that I've often heard, right? And so what I mean by that is that it is possible to sustain yourself financially while also pursuing a career that is justice oriented. And I think one of the most problematic aspects of really any profession, but let's say our profession, is that people present those two as if they are on opposite sides. Like either you're going to be able to provide for your family and go into corporate law, or you gonna be broke and unable to sustain yourself, but at least you can do good work. My response to that was always I'll start my response to it was I was like, well, I've been broke forever, so what's another 40 years? But that's not necessarily the answer everyone wants to hear after spending a few $1,000s in law school. But I do think it's possible to do both. But I do also, want to put forward too that, another thing that I used to be, worse at, but that I've gotten better at is like, everyone has their own situation, their own priorities, their own needs. And there are folks who, who go into the law because they need to make money to support, a bunch of folks. And I'll never criticize them for that. I do think that people who go into public interest meaning like nonprofit, like government, like what have you, a lot of those folks go into it because they can afford to. I mean, honestly, like they have families who can support them, or they don't have debt because someone paid it off, or like XYZ. And so I say that it's an intensely personal decision, but and to not feel bad about which of those decisions that it is, to me, as long as you're not actively perpetuating injustice, but I will say that it is possible to do well and do good, or to do good and to financially sustain yourself. I think you can do both of those things. And there are people too who say that you can do well and that you can amass wealth, and that you can then use that to fund social justice work. And, that is possible. I think it's important to remember, once you earn that wealth, what it is that your values were before you became wealthy. But I think that is possible in theory as well. And so it's just very much, your decision. But I think the important thing in all this is like finding ways either, outside of your career, in your free time or through your job, even if you're a corporate, even you work at a corporate firm, there are pro bono opportunities. Pro bono meaning free legal representation, right? I mean, I've seen lawyers who work in corporate law firms, but spend a significant amount of their time doing things, working on like, helping folks who have been wrongfully convicted to get out of prison, or helping folks who have gotten out of prison to sue, because they were wrongfully jailed, or folks, helping folks to access their justice that way. And so I think that whatever field, whatever path you follow, there's always ways to do justice. But I think the more important thing is to be cognizant of why it is you went to law in the first place. And I think that looks like surrounding yourself with people who remind you why you went into that. Because I think, sometimes you get into certain fields where, you're surrounded by people who may have different priorities, and it can be easy to forget. It's very easy to forget those priorities once you access privilege. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But you can do well and do good. That is absolutely, those two things are not opposed at all.
So, okay. Sorry, Ariana, go ahead.
So my last question was, I've always wanted to be an attorney growing up, and so I've always been connected with people in the field. And something that really stuck with me was one woman told me that, the law industry, it's a good old boy system, and that it's hard for you to break those barriers. And like, why would you focus on that industry when one person can't change the world, she said. So knowing that you want to go into the civil law, like, what's your motivation for that?
Yeah, I've actually, actually have had that thought sometimes too about like, well, I think the law is, I think that the law is, again, it's incredibly flawed, and it's incredibly biased, and it's incredibly problematic, and it does not favor people who look like you and me. And there are a lot of indications that things are kind of going in the wrong direction. I don't know if I can say it. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say it regardless. You can edit out in post, but I think that things are going in the very wrong direction, thanks to our Supreme Court and various other courts. So it is kind of hard to kind of be like, one, how to keep the faith that things are going better. Things are going to get better in the first place, but also there's so much that's wrong. And there are so many people that are being victimized, and so many people that are being, targeted by police and being thrown in, being evicted wrongfully. All these, sorts of things are happening. And what can one person do? And when I came into the law, I wanted to be like, I can change, I want to change, the law. And, I mean, I think, I think it is possible, but you kind of learn a bit more. But to me, I feel like my mindset has become not necessarily like a quantity mindset. So like, to me, it's not maybe how many people can I sort of, I mean, I would like to impact a lot of people in a deep way. But to me, it also is incredibly valuable to make change in the lives of even a handful of people. And I think you come to that understanding when you have clients and you meet them and you understand what's going on in their lives. Like I did family law for low-income people for 2 years in law school. So divorces, child custody, people who are being abused in their relationships, all of those things. And, when I came in, I was like, oh, how can I change certain aspects of family law? I didn't change aspects of family law when I was in there for 2 years. But what I can say is that, I made a lot of change in the lives of various people. I, helped, folks who were, get the right, parents, get the custody of their child, from another parent who might have been abusive, or helping, folks with maybe who were in, situations that weren't great. And, when you impact one thing that I realized, one thing that kind of pushed me to become a lawyer is that I kind of saw this stat, which was like, I think this is about the number. I saw the statistic that was like, within the past year, 70% of low-income people like face a significant like legal situation, and a situation that could have life-altering outcomes. And of that 70%, 90% of them didn't have any legal representation. And one thing that you realize is that small, not small, but like there are these things that can happen that will really impact not just the life of the person that you're helping, but the life of future generations. Like eviction, for example, being evicted from a house, that can have impact in the lives of the person who's being evicted, but their children, and their broader families, like, who will be impacted by memories of being insecure in their housing, or who, you be evicted, it's harder to get a job. It cascades. And so my sense was like, whether I can make, change that'll go into a law textbook or not, I came in to help people. And if I can change, one life or a handful of lives, then I've done, my job. And I think each person has to come to a personal, personal reckoning of what, seeing that the law has been, kind of enforced for, like 250 years, at least, in the United States. And, being one person, and it's like, where do I put my time and resources? Do I focus on civil rights? Do I focus on housing? Do I focus on, I don't know, folks who have been like, wrongfully fired from their jobs? It's a personal question, but I think that, as with any industry, like if you can make change and impact even in the lives of just a few people, you've done an incredible amount of work. Anything beyond that is just a surplus. And you can do that as a lawyer, absolutely.
And so I have two final questions for you. The first is, you've mentioned a couple of times, do justice. And so I think that justice should be a word you can go and look up in the dictionary. However, we know that it means a lot of different things. And so what does justice mean to you?
Yeah. So to me, justice means, I guess, like any outcome that gets us closer to a world in which, there's equity. People can access equal opportunities and privileges and rights, not just, and there be no distinction based on, their circumstance, their race, their income, where they were born. And to the extent that our law produces unjust outcomes, someone being thrown in jail for 50 years because they had some crack cocaine, someone being wrongfully convicted and spending 40 years of their life in prison for something they didn't do, someone being evicted from their house when they're doing the best they can to make ends meet. It's any outcome that gets us closer to, a world in which they have the same access to those privileges as someone who was born privileged racially or financially or what have you. And so it's in my mind, it's pretty expansive. It's pretty expansive vision, but ultimately my vision would be equity. I mean, equal access to opportunities, and for the many wrongs that our law produces to be redressed, and for the folks who have helped produce that injustice to be held fully and equally accountable without any preferential treatment in society or in the law. So.
Okay, and so now here's like bringing this all full circle. So our first question asks for your earliest memory, and you were talking about a lime green phone, right? And the great philosopher, I think it was Kevin Gates, said that he had two phones. And so my last question is, who is the greatest musician and why?
Oh man, greatest music. Well, Greatest musician. That's
It
a
could
very,
be the greatest musician of this week, of all time. You interpret the question however you like.
I mean, my favorite, well, I mean, my favorite rapper, I'm talking about my favorite rapper. My favorite rapper is DMX. Um, and I think he might have to be one of the greatest musicians, and not necessarily because of his incredible musicality, although I do think he has some great songs, and he was a good actor too, I will say. But DMX is a man who, I mean, he grew up with like no support whatsoever. I mean, he was, he said he was essentially raised by like the alley dogs, like New York, right? But he he had been exposed to crack at a young age from a person that he trusted, and he dealt with that addiction for the rest of his life. But I think through all of that, he was a person who, in my mind, always kind of, and well, I think he was a very human person, and he had a lot of flaws and a lot of shortcomings, many of which, not all of which, but several of which he acknowledged later on in life. But always having a positive outcome, always trying to rid himself of some of those harms to which he had been exposed, some of those traumas that he brought up, and that he was very, very open and honest with the broader community about what he was going through in a very vulnerable way. And I think there are a few artists that you can sort of hear and hear and feel the pain, but also the triumph and the life lessons that he put forth while still maintaining incredible, unshakable faith in a higher power, even though some people look at his life and in many ways question how he was able to maintain such a strong faith in a just God. And I think someone who, he's an incredible person who lays all that stuff bare, and I think he to me is an incredible figure in that sense. So big DMX fan.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. I really do appreciate this. And on behalf of Ariana and I, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you, Ariana, and all the very best of luck. And if I, could be helpful in any way, please let me know. I'm excited for your journey. You have a great journey ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and Ebony, always a pleasure.